Trust me, if the premise of this movie doesn't capture your attention, nothing will. So, what if Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, switched lives with an impersonator to escape the limelight and lived into elderly age, only to befriend a man who claims to be President John F. Kennedy in a retirement home where the occupants are being killed one by one by an ancient mummy that sucks out its victims' souls via their assholes. If you're still with me, this is Bubba Hotep. Despite its absolutely deranged premise, you'll be surprised to hear that many years ago, Bubba Hotep managed to make me shed genuine tears, because while it is an unapologetic B-movie in the purest form, it is also a remarkably poignant character study about dignity, aging, and our idealistic attachment to legacy. In fact, Evil Dead icon Bruce Campbell might be best known for his quippy, charming, smartass delivery, and that's still all true here, but he also easily gives the most moving performance of his career. To this day, I strongly hold the opinion he deserved awards recognition for this, but given the film's extremely low budget and grassroots distribution, Bubba Hotep largely went unseen until its eventual video release in 2004. Written and directed by Don Coscarelli, the film developed a cult following while on the indie festival circuit and was adapted from a short story by pulp writer Joe Lansdale, who himself was surprised that anyone would want to adapt his ludicrous creation. Coscarelli explained that while it was the far-fetched premise that caught his eye, it was the thematic parallels to his 1979 supernatural cult horror Phantasm that truly defined the heart of the story. For context, Coscarelli conceived Phantasm as a surrealist meditation on how America comprehends the tragedy, absurdity, and unpredictability of death through the lens of a grieving teenager forced to come to terms with its inevitable ubiquity via a haunted funeral home. With Bubba Hotep, Coscarelli wanted to take those themes and focus on the opposite spectrum of age, this time through the treatment of the elderly and the legacy they leave behind, if indeed any at all, via a haunted retirement home. Here's the thing you have to understand about Bubba Hotep: you have to see it to believe it, because for all its campiness, absurdity, vulgarity, and political incorrectness, it is an incredibly thoughtful and touching film that is so much more than what it might appear on the surface. And by the end of this video, I hope I've gone some way into doing it justice, because it is difficult to sell its sincerity when you look at what it is at face value. It is comfort food filmmaking at its finest, so brace yourself. Now, just before we go any further, this video is sponsored by ZocDoc. Have you ever been like me where you get sick or injured but struggle to get a doctor's appointment in a timely manner and thus end up putting off scheduling one entirely? For example, last year, I was dealing with a shoulder impingement that initially took me a few weeks to get booked in with my GP before being put on a waiting list for an x-ray that took several months, and it wasn't until a few months after that did I finally see an orthopedic specialist. That's just one of many times where I've struggled to get a convenient doctor's appointment without resorting to expensive private treatment, whether it be for injury, sickness, or mental health. If that sounds like you, ZocDoc is a free website where you can search and compare high-quality in-network doctors, choose one that suits your needs, and instantly book an appointment. ZocDoc catalogs over 100,000 healthcare providers ranging from mental health to dental to eye care to skin care and much more, and you can filter via specialty, location, insurance compatibility, and ratings by verified patients. You can actually see each provider's individual appointment times and choose one that works for you, which is especially handy if you're at work or have kids, or like me, you're just chaotically busy all the time. ZocDoc appointments can happen fast within just 24 to 72 hours of booking, with same-day appointments without the hassle of talking to anyone or waiting online or on the phone. All you need to do is click the link in the description below or visit ZocDoc.com/ryanhollinger to easily book local top-rated doctors who can see you quickly today. Thanks to ZocDoc for sponsoring this video. Bubba Hotep opens by setting the tone for its humor through the description of its unique title, let's say. What we're bluntly dealing with is a 4,000-year-old mummy named Amenhotep, who was the descendant of an Egyptian dynasty and whose surname means king, because what we're eventually going to see is the king of rock and roll fight the king of an Egyptian dynasty. Bubba, conversely, is a derogatory name given to a southern US man. Thus, Bubba Hotep is ultimately the name given to the mummy by Elvis and fittingly delivered by Bruce Campbell because the mummy is dressed like a Texan cowboy to blend in with the film setting of Mud Creek, Texas. Look, if you're already offended or groaning, things aren't about to get much better, as the first narration we receive from Elvis is him talking about an infected pustule growth on the tip of his penis that he's happily named after his ex-wife. All you need to understand at first is that this Elvis is a vain, sleazy, selfish arsehole who is about to go through quite the character arc in his journey of self-improvement. Now, what's interesting about the casting of Bruce Campbell is how his charming and empathetic performance helps us sympathize with this Elvis. As Coscarelli explained, when he first met Bruce Campbell, it was during a convention where the energy in the room amongst fans was so electric and palpable that Campbell already embodied the enormous, captivating presence that Elvis Presley was known for. If you've ever watched an interview or appearance from Bruce Campbell, this will come as no surprise. He's a larger-than-life personality who commands a room with a natural confidence and sincerity, while his cocky, smartass qualities evocative of his iconic character Ash Williams are just an endearing part of his personality, instead of it being some phony act you see some actors put on to make them seem either edgy or relatable outside the Hollywood bubble. As a result, there's a kind of meta, self-aware element to Bruce Campbell's casting where his own real legacy as a B-movie icon playing this type of egotistical character echoes the character of Elvis missing the limelight that once gave him purpose and validation. Admittedly though, what influences my interpretation here is that Bruce Campbell did actually make a movie like this a few years later, which he produced and directed, called My Name is Bruce, where he plays a heightened, fictionalized version of himself fighting the Chinese god of the dead. It's not as thoughtful as Bubba Hotep, but it's definitely worth a watch if you're in any way into Campbell's gleefully sardonic and self-deprecating sense of humor. Anyway, the film immediately puts you into Elvis's frail and fleeting mindset by establishing the retirement home as this old, grimy, dilapidated building that's definitely seen better days, and it's a far cry from the glitz and glamour this washed-up, self-proclaimed starlet was once used to. After witnessing his roommate pass away painfully, it leaves a distressed Elvis wallowing in fear and self-pity, unsure if he's dreaming or awake, as time goes by at the blink of an eye. Notably, it presents the occupants of the retirement home in an acutely unflattering and undignified manner, as they waste away alone and forgotten in a living purgatory that will soon become a soul-collecting farm for Bubba Hotep, who basically represents the Grim Reaper. It's admittedly a little jarring at first just how strangely grim and miserable the setup is, but then again, it is technically still a horror movie, if indeed it does lean almost exclusively on camp and comedy. It isn't long until Bubba Hotep is summoned for the first time, after a cheeky elderly lady is attacked by a scarab beetle and dragged away in front of a bed-bound oblivious Elvis, who at this point is still suffering from disorientation from having been in a coma for so long. When he finally readjusts to the world, he asks the daughter of his recently deceased roommate for a memento of him, because despite not really knowing the guy, he felt a sympathetic attachment to him. It's the first of many scenes to demonstrate the film's deeply empathetic tenderness, as Elvis then learns that his roommate's daughter never once visited her father and let him die alone and forgotten, triggering Elvis to show anger due to his own fears of the same thing happening to him. To him, it's the first mirror into his soul, as we learn he has an estranged daughter he's unable to connect with, and simply idles around hoping she might one day reach out to him. Mild spoiler here, but she never does, for the very reasons Elvis comes to accept about his own selfish, scared, problematic behavior later in the story. Now, the thing is, nobody in this retirement home actually believes he is the real Elvis. As far as records show, he's registered as Sebastian Haff, which which Elvis explains is the name of the impersonator he decided to switch identities with to escape his life of fame and fortune. When his roommate's daughter asks why he would sacrifice such riches and legacy, Elvis explains that it simply made him miserable. He felt less like a person and more like a caricature and product that people took advantage of, including his own friends. He was a prisoner to his persona, and it made him question his identity so much so that he decided to forge a better life where he could be himself and only ever have to pretend to be the Elvis everybody knew. The problem, however, is that he lost his contract with Sebastian in a barbecue accident, so evidence of his formal Prince and the Pauper role reversal no longer exists, and thus he's effectively stuck in his own purgatorial crisis of identity. In fact, when reminded that Elvis is dead when indirectly referring to Sebastian, it scares Elvis because he's confronted with how forgotten and meaningless his life has now become, and that's on top of being faced with his own aging and mortality. As Coscarelli summarized, the movie is ultimately about two old men who were once legends and icons and are now nobodies, forgotten to history and living in the shadow of their former selves. I think that's the point of the film that hits the hardest. There's an existential horror that underpins the story about how you move into the next stage of your life, knowing it will never reach the same heights, euphoria, and expectations of your formative years. When that aspect of your life that defines you ceases to be, for whatever reason, through time, how do you reconfigure your identity and realize what's been important and you've taken for granted for so long? I realize we're still dealing with a movie where Elvis takes on a fucking mummy, but this is what the film mainly focuses on, and it takes a lot of life experience and reflection to make something like this work the way that it does. However, things only continue to get more insane when JFK is introduced. So, this character is not exactly who I remember from when I first watched it many years ago, but basically, Elvis befriends another occupant called Jack, who also disputes his real identity by claiming to be former US President John F. Kennedy, who in this universe apparently survived his assassination, but his survival was covered up by Lyndon B. Johnson, who conspired to take over the presidency for himself. Now, it turns out I misremembered the explanation for the elephant in the room here. I thought it was a brain transplant, but we don't need to get into the specifics of that. All you need to know is that the film never confirms whether or not he is in fact JFK. Instead, it leaves it ambiguous by showing a scar on the back of his head that Jack claims is now filled with sand to imply possible truth to his narrative. I mean, the other guy is claiming to be the real Elvis Presley, so for all we know, the reality of this world is just stranger than fiction. Although, if you were to ask me my theory on this character, I think it's thematically fitting and much more tragic to simply see Jack as nothing more than a lonely, paranoid guy suffering from late-stage dementia and trying to remember his past. This way, it makes his emotional parallel to Elvis more direct, as he is also going through his own ambiguous psychological turbulence. The less we understand about what is truly going on in their heads, the more we come to understand the sense of helpless uncertainty the occupants feel when dealing with the doctors and nurses. After Elvis explains to Jack that he ended up in the retirement home as a result of breaking his hip and falling off the stage and into a coma, it finally takes us to what we've all been waiting for, an aging Elvis Presley and, I guess, JFK taking on a 4-century-old Egyptian mummy. During Bubba Hotep's next attack, Elvis survives a fight with a scarab beetle and finds Jack on the floor of his room, having seemingly survived his own attack, but awakening under the suspicion that Lyndon B. Johnson came back to finish the job despite Johnson being dead for nearly 30 years at this point. It leads Jack into investigating for himself and uncovering the truth about what's going on, when the discovery of hieroglyphics and a conveniently expository Necronomicon-esque journal reveals that the retirement home is haunted by a spirit known as the Soul Sucker. We come to learn that Amenhotep's mummy became submerged in the nearby river after the vehicle it was being transferred in crashed, and now its body is free from its tomb to consume souls via the back-end orifice of its victims to rejuvenate its life force. You could say it makes the retirement home a bit of a symbolic temple for its goal, as Jack and Elvis conclude, since the elderly are basically being put away into storage until their inevitable passing, the home essentially acts as a conveyor belt for the resident Grim Reaper that can keep devouring souls indefinitely because nobody is going to question death beyond natural causes. Interestingly, for what it's working with, it actually makes Hotep out to be fairly ominous, until Elvis confronts him for the first time and experiences flashbacks of Hotep's former life, acting as another mirror into Elvis's own past. Like Elvis, Amenhotep lived a life of meaningless indulgence, riches, and women, and now what's left is nothing more than a forgotten, preserved, dehydrated turd of a corpse in its own purgatory. It contrasts with the saddening death of one of Elvis's other friends from a ruptured heart, as he relives his formative gunslinging childhood trying to be a hero and shoot the mummy, leaving Elvis to remark that he not only went out guns blazing, but distinctly with his soul intact. It causes Elvis to reflect on the dehumanizing experience that the retirement residents feel in the final stage of their lives. There's an element of, we are still people, we still have lives that matter. Instead of feeling happy and free, they feel oppressed, degraded, and patronized by the doctors and nurses who treat them like kids playing past their bedtime, forcing them into restrictions and curfews that then prompts a desire for Elvis and Jack to reclaim control of their lost independence one final time. I say final time because out of the blue, like a hammer to the head, Elvis reveals he's dying of cancer. He feels it in his soul and is fully aware that the staff is trying to keep it from him in the hopes that age will catch up with him first. He reflects on his past mistakes and takes responsibility for the circumstances he finds himself in, realizing he cannot be angry at his daughter for not visiting because it was his fault for causing the estrangement to begin with. We see a man remorseful of the pride he realizes he never had. Death brings him closer to who he truly is. Being Elvis, the myth, the legend he created, was a mask, a smokescreen for him to drown his insecurities in drugs, booze, and women. As he says, he spent his life only ever fantasizing about being a hero, and now accepting who he truly is, he can in fact become that hero by killing a supernatural zombified mummy. The following night, Jack and Elvis sneak out to destroy Bubba Hotep with fire, dressing as their respective identities, with Elvis even revealing his medicine bag contains only symbolic mementos of those who mean the most to him, including a picture of his daughter. Like I said at the start, it's honestly difficult to describe just how well the movie gets you in the feels. Campbell's performance mixed with the soulful score do tremendous work, and from here we see the final battle play out as dramatically as it possibly could, given the frail, aging conditions of its characters. After Jack is ambushed and violently falls off his chair, Elvis ignites the mummy into flames and comforts Jack as he peacefully and heroically passes away. But the mummy then returns, causing Elvis to use Jack's motorized wheelchair to crash him and Hotep down the ridge towards the riverbed. Elvis is then able to torch the mummy again and destroy it once and for all, freeing the souls of all those he devoured. However, as the dust settles, Elvis discovers he is fatally wounded, and as he lies dying after defeating evil, he accepts his fate and remarks that, like his friends, he managed to hold on to his soul until the bitter end. Hieroglyphics in the sky simply read out, "All is well," and after speaking his classic line, thank you very much," Elvis dies peacefully. Look, I know out of context this all still sounds very ridiculous despite my efforts to make it sound sad and sentimental, but honestly, it goes back to what I said at the start. You just have to see it to believe it. And if you do, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And until next time, stay safe, stay away from retirement homes, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye.